Here's a clip from our latest episode of Booked on Rock. Our guest, Pat Gilbert, he's just released the new expanded 50th anniversary edition of Passion is a Fashion, the real story of The Clash. Joe Strummer, he's born John Mellor.
John Mellor, yeah.
You explore that complicated relationship between Joe Strummer of The Clash, quote unquote, and John Mellor. Did researching his upbringing change how you viewed him?
No, because it was always in the music press at the time that Joe, I mean, as I mentioned before, that he came from a different background to the other people in the band. And rock and roll is about reinvention. Rock and roll is about you're a normal guy or gal, and you put on a set of clothes, you develop an attitude, you maybe take on a different name, and you transform yourself, and in doing so, you might end up transforming other people, how they behave, how they think, and so on. So I always knew Joe would be a sort of complicated person to meet, but when you did actually meet him, he was absolutely fine. He was full of mischief. He was full of fun. He had that, I never really felt he was putting on too much of an act. Especially towards the end of his life, in The Clash, he was became this kind of demon. It was a performance when he was on stage, definitely. But I think he kind of resolved those issues, or maybe it's just that whole thing about he was always driven to escape his upbringing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think if you're born into a world that you're not comfortable with, sort of transcending that, I don't think, by whatever means possible, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Do you think Joe died still wrestling with the legacy of The Clash?
I think he did. And I think there's Chris Salovich, another British journalist who was, hung out with The Clash and wrote about them a lot at the time. He was always saying that Joe always wanted to reform The Clash. I think The Clash were Joe's big legacy, and he was always keen on the idea of getting them back on the road and getting them out there, because he maybe within that context was a context that he made most sense as a human being and to himself. He was Joe Strummer of The Clash. And you have to wind back. So if you wind back to like the late 90s and the very early 2000s, and Joe died in 2002, The Clash's stock was quite low at that point. In Britain in the 1990s, we had the big Cool Britannia thing with Oasis and Blur, and music moved on a generation, and nobody was talking about The Clash much at all. And when Joe formed his band, the Mescaleros, and after almost a 10-year break, went back on the road with the Mescaleros, he was playing to relatively small audiences. I saw the first gig of his, or one of the very first gigs he did when he came back in '99, and it was to maybe 300 or 400 people. If it would be in The Clash, it would have been 4,000 people. And I think he found that quite difficult. And I think the music he made then was some of the best music that he ever made. It really was good, but it was never going to go anywhere commercially, or even possibly even pay for itself. So I think there was definitely a Clash reunion brewing at the time in Joe's head around the time he died.
Yeah, you think that would have happened pretty soon?
Well, they were in the last months of his life. It was announced the Clash were going to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So there was a lot of talk about whether they should get together to play around the induction. But as far as I mean, the Clash was a very complicated entity. But I think it was Paul Simonon who was the most trenchant in not wanting to play, because he viewed it as a kind of corporate event, or driven by corporate corporate energy and forces, so he was against it. But whether they would have done, I don't know. I reckon it is 50-50.
Listen to the full episode wherever you get your podcasts.